Good morning. It's Wednesday, May 21st. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 593 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. Multiple reports last night suggest the Israelis may be preparing for an attack on the Iranian nuclear program if those talks start to fall apart. First, let me just say, I don't know how credible this is, but it should come as no surprise that Israel is considering such a move. Iran's air defenses are still down, and the clock is ticking. Meanwhile, U.S. nuclear talks with Iran seem to be going nowhere. But let me also say, Israel gets one chance to do this. All will likely be forgiven here in the United States if the nuclear program is destroyed. All will not be forgiven if the attack fails and a war erupts. It's high stakes, folks. So as always, we continue to watch with bated breath. Lots happening in the Middle East these days, but one actor that seems to have fallen off everyone's radar is Egypt. Cairo is, of course, a longtime U.S. strategic partner and the keeper of a fragile peace with Israel, except Cairo is now cozying up to Washington's number one global rival, China. To help me make sense of that hot mess today is FDD's resident Egypt expert, Mariam Wahba. Stay tuned. Our conversation is coming your way shortly. The UK, France, and Canada have Israel in their crosshairs. First, they say Israel needs to lift restrictions on humanitarian aid into Gaza. And second, they say Israel needs to stop building settlements in the West Bank. London, Paris, and Ottawa all warned of consequences if Israel doesn't take sufficient action on either front. All right, let's unpack this. First, Israel is already easing restrictions on aid to Gaza. That's happening now. It's happening slowly, but it's happening. And on the issue of settlements, I really must ask, is that really what has these countries fired up right now in the Middle East? Not Iranian nukes, not Houthi missiles, not Hamas taking innocent hostages? Where's the outrage, folks? Seriously, I'll tell you what's happening. All three countries are taking heat from their not inconsiderable Muslim constituents right now, and the governments are simply paying it forward. Profiles encourage, not so much. But it gets worse. Yesterday, the UK suspended free trade talks with Israel and imposed sanctions on 7 targets in the West Bank. Then Foreign Secretary David Lammy warned Israel that history will judge the country for what he said are indefensible actions. I'm struggling to recall what any of these countries have done to secure the release of the hostages or to halt Iran's march to a nuke. Heck, Hamas is quite pleased with what London, Ottawa, and Paris are doing. Ditto the regime in Tehran. Western values seem to be losing value lately. So, hey, Canada, Britain, and France, I got one thing to say. You're on the wrong side of history, and I can't stop cringing. Now for your headlines. Headline 1. The Israeli cabinet approved plans to build a security barrier along Israel's border with Jordan. The barrier will be 425 kilometers long. For those of us raised in the United States and remain willfully ignorant about the metric system used by literally everyone else on the planet, that's just shy of 265 miles. Go learn something. And this won't be some low-budget fence. It's a high-tech barrier equipped with advanced sensors reinforced by mobile military units. This new security initiative is a joint effort between the Israeli government and an NGO called Hashomer HaChadash, which translates to the New Guard. This fence is sorely needed and way overdue. Why? Because Iran is working overtime to turn the Jordanian border into a lawless zone of terrorism and weapons smuggling. Israel will start on about 50 miles of the barrier while planning continues for the rest of the project. Here's the catch. The actual trajectory of the barrier is going to anger just about everyone. We're talking about a physical border here. If it eats into settlements, the Israeli right will be furious. If it doesn't, the Israeli left will be mad. If it's built on Jordanian soil, the Jordanians won't like it. And on it goes. Welcome to the Middle East, folks. Headline 2, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is traveling to Lebanon this week, and the corrupt Alta cocker might actually notch a legitimate win. His 3-day visit kicks off today. Ahead of Abbas's arrival, a member of his delegation told the press that Abbas is going to release the issue, or he's going to actually raise, rather, the issue of disarming factions in Lebanon's Palestinian camps during talks with Lebanese officials. The Lebanese army has long stayed out of these 12 camps where members of Abbas's own Fatah faction, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, PFLP, and an alphabet soup of other armed groups have been operating. Like the Jordanian fence, this conversation is seriously overdue. These groups are armed to the teeth, and the camps are often the scene of internecine violence. Oh, and while we're on the topic of overdue initiatives in Lebanon, how about granting citizenship to Palestinians in Lebanon and ending their refugee status? That would go a long way to helping the Lebanese government restore stability to a country where angry, armed Palestinians who have remained stateless for decades are literally not allowed to hold certain jobs because the Lebanese state wanted them to remain symbols of suffering for the Palestinian cause. And headline 3, the U.S. State Department announced a reward of up to $10 million for information leading to the disruption of Hezbollah financial networks. State's area of interest may surprise some of you. It's not Lebanon. It's not even the Middle East. State wants information on Hezbollah's financial networks in the tri-border area of South America, which includes Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. In the so-called TBA, Hezbollah financiers and facilitators generate cash through a range of enterprises like drug trafficking, oil smuggling, and counterfeiting U.S. dollars. There's also money laundering, the illicit diamond trade, and just good old-fashioned cigarette smuggling. Name a shady business, and chances are Hezbollah is working in it down in South America. So if you have any tips, send them to State Department's way. You might just receive a $10 million check in the mail. Just don't forget to send finder's fees to your humble host here. The morning brief doesn't pay for itself, you know. All right, let's dive into that conversation with FDD's Egypt specialist, Mariam Wahba. She'll help us unpack how Egypt fits into the regional and global landscape, from its growing ties with China to its military buildup in the Sinai Peninsula. We might even dig into the Horn of Africa while we're at it. Welcome to the program, Mariam Wahba.
Good to be with you, John.
All right. Well, let's start with this recent news. The Egyptians just ran a massive exercise with the Chinese army, and they did it with U.S. weapons and platforms because these are U.S. allies. So what the heck is going on here?
What the heck is going on? So Egypt and China just ran an 18-day combined air drill right above the pyramids in full view of everybody, including the U.S. And there's a lot to be worried about here. Obviously, I know you said American weapons were used. We actually don't know that for sure that American weapons were used. The Egyptians were not so forthcoming about what weapons were used. And there's a couple things that we got to discuss. So a combined air drill like this usually would get considerable media attention, both in China and in Egypt. The funny thing is it didn't, not in Egypt at least. PLA news outlets were covering the drills with video footage and pictures. And most of the things that we collected here at FDD actually came from those sources and not from Egyptian sources. It was kept pretty tight-lipped in Egypt for that fact, because they did not want to disclose what weapons were used. The other interesting thing about this relationship is not new. Cairo and Beijing have had a blossoming relationship for the last several decades, really dating back to as early as the Cold War. But in the last few decades, they've really upped their diplomatic and economic engagement. So there's a lot to say about what weapon systems the Chinese have sold the Egyptians, and we know that they've given them drones and other small arms over the last few decades. But I think what's more interesting is kind of the upping the ante on the cultural and diplomatic relationships and what that means from, the Arab Street, the phrase I know you love to hate or hate to love, whichever way you want to use it. So we see Confucius Institutes popping up in Cairo. We see sons and daughters of diplomats that would usually learn English or even French are now learning Mandarin in schools. And we see that polls conducted in Cairo and even urban areas of Egypt, where the average Egyptian citizenship sees China as a better, more reliable ally than the West, than America, really. And I think this is a really troubling pattern that should sound the alarms across Washington.
Yeah, I mean, obviously something we got to keep our eye on. And I guess I sort of understand that the transactional nature of the way that the CCP operates, that might appeal more to Egypt, because we keep wagging our fingers at the Egyptians saying, we don't like your human rights record. We don't like how you're acting, sort of on a range of issues relating to democracy or liberalization, and they're just not loving it. So it may make sense that they're running into the arms of the CCP. But I do want to say, we've been selling them billions of dollars of weapons, right? We give them more than $1 billion a year in aid last time I checked. And a lot of that, almost all of it, is spent on weaponry. So the idea that they would be using other platforms strikes me as not really credible. However, I guess if we don't know, we don't know. Next question for you. The Arab League is led in large part by Egypt. This is sort of an Egyptian invention almost. And the Arab League just met. So my question to you is, anything come of that? And I guess maybe more specifically, anything good come of that? It rarely does.
Yeah, well, unfortunately or fortunately, it was kind of a snooze fest on Saturday when the Arab League met, and we can discuss if that's for better or for worse. There was kind of two notable things, two interesting things that stood out to me. First and foremost is Syria's new interim president, al-Shara, was not in attendance, and this was kind of the question that I first came to mind when the events that unfolded back in November and December, and I was wondering, this meeting is coming up. Obviously, the Arab League was a big part of the Assad regime rehabilitation campaign. So how are they going to perceive al-Shara? And he was not in attendance because of various reasons, but primarily the hesitancy that Iraqi Shiite militias have towards him. And what's interesting here is the West is obviously, of course, hesitant to embrace Shara for very good reasons. And so is the region for very different reasons. And I thought that was unique to see that on display, the alignment of Western and Arab states prepositioned towards Syria. The second interesting thing, and this goes to Egypt, is how Egypt has continuously displayed that it lives in a pre-October 7th world. Obviously, the Arab League is a platform where they come together to wag their fingers in Israel and to call for the cessation of aggression, to use their words, against the Jewish state. But Egypt really went hard at this meeting to call for a ceasefire, to call for the cessation of aggression by Israel. And there was this one unique sentence said by al-Sisi that really stood out to me. And he said, even if all Arab states normalize relations with the state of Israel, peace and justice, or something to that effect, will not come into effect unless a Palestinian state is set up. And I just can't help by really sitting in that moment and realizing how removed Egypt is from the dialogue, how removed they are from reality, and how they're engaging with this conflict, with this administration, really, because they know what the demands are from both Israel and the U.S., and they're just operating in a completely different realm. And what do you think?
I mean, I guess my question is, and we keep hearing this, you have all of these countries around the region that are demanding a Palestinian state, and the Israelis are saying, we're not ready. So the question is, who's not living in reality? I mean, obviously, you've got something like 22 states from the Arab world. They're looking at Israel and saying, you're not based in reality. And the Israelis are saying, you guys aren't living in reality. We've got a fundamental disconnect between Israel and the entire Arab world. And that bothers me a little bit right now, because really we do need to get everybody on the same page if we're going to solve this. I'd like to see everybody first call for the dismantling of Hamas, for the exile of those leaders, for the return of all the hostages. Let a little calm prevail in the region, and then we can start to talk about a Palestinian state. The idea that we want to skip to dessert seems a little funny to me, but, and again, what do I know? I've only been studying this region for 30 years and still don't feel like I know anything. All right, next question for you. What about this military buildup we keep hearing about in Cairo? Is this something, it's actually in the Sinai Peninsula, is this something that Israel should be worried about? Are the Camp David Accords in danger? Are they unraveling? What's your take on what's happening here?
Right. So this is a headline that's waxed and waned over the last couple months, and we've been watching it very closely here at FDD. Is the Camp Accords in danger? I think that's a very loaded question. I think the answer is no. Egypt and Israel both understand what's at stake. The U.S. understands what's at stake. And all three parties, I think, have done a decent job of keeping that intact, because they understand if that were to fall apart, the dire consequences that would play out. With regards to Egypt, I think we have to look at everything the Sisi regime does in context of, first, obviously, how we perceive them on the international stage, but I think more importantly, how it plays out domestically. This is a regime that's coming up on 11 years post-Arab Spring. This is a regime that's legitimacy has come into question by both good and bad actors. We know the Muslim Brotherhood loves to attack Sisi. And I think there's a lot of political and social unrest in Egypt. And I think Sisi does things to play to that, to play to again, that word, Arab street, to play to the Egyptian public. I know, it makes you cringe. And I think everything that they do, including the Sinai buildup, has to has to take into consideration what it is that Sisi is dealing with domestically. On the Israeli front, there's kind of a spectrum of, are they worried? Are they approaching this with a laissez-faire approach? And I think there's a happy medium here. There should be somebody watching this, like we are, and there should be people ringing the alarm when things start moving too fast and too much. And there's a pragmatism here that really should sit down and think about what advantages does Sisi take from moving military equipment into the Sinai, and how is the rational, wise way to react to it?
Yeah, I mean, I will just say, and I think I tend to agree that, our hair should not be on fire here. But I think the buildup is not insignificant. And of course, when the Israelis watch the Egyptians mobilize, and when they practice against their enemies, right, when they engage in these training exercises, the enemy is always one country. And let's just say it's not Libya, it's not Sudan, it's always Israel. So I think that bothers me, and we have to obviously keep an eye on it. But I know you were just in Israel, and I know you were talking to folks over there. I'm glad they're talking to you about it. I'm glad they're talking to us about it, because I do think that this is it's not a non-story. It may not be the main event, but I think we need to keep a close eye on it. Speaking of Sudan, you've been following this country. The civil war there continues to rage. This could be consequential for the Middle East if the Islamists win against the secularists. But this is a conflict where there really is no good guy, right? I mean, tell us what's happening there. I think a lot of people are just simply not aware of what's going on in Sudan.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. This is really not a conflict where there is a good guy, where there's a clear answer, where there's a clear way for the U.S. to approach and engage this conflict. And again, even the secularists in this conflict are not the good guys. So you have the RSF and the SIF, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, and they're now entering more than 2 years of brutal civil war, one that the State Department's labeled an actual genocide. There goes that G word. And ethnic cleansing is taking place by both parties. I think the most fascinating part of this conflict, and really the way that creates an opening for the U.S. to engage, to not only see this to see this brutal conflict come to an end, but really to see the region stabilize, is foreign intervention. We are seeing several foreign actors engage this conflict and take sides. I mean, Iran, Russia, Turkey, just to name a few of the foreign interventionists that see an opportunity in Sudan and have taken it. We've seen all these actors give weapons, supplies, money, support, political support to both factions, and I think this is really troubling.
Yeah, I mean, I think what folks need to understand as they listen in is that this is a country that at one point was a training ground for Al Qaeda and for Hamas and a whole host of Sunni jihadi groups. That was in the 1990s. And then in the 2000s, we really saw Sudan transform into a place where Iran was operating. We saw a massive amount of smuggling and training taking place. The Iranians were actually working with a range of armed groups to get them ready to fight Israel, but also to fight inside Africa as well. And it was a place where Iran was selling weapons, and this was filling their coffers as they built up their war chest to wage war across the region, what we're watching right now. Then we saw in 2020, right, we saw the normalization agreement between Sudan and Israel, and it really looked like we had turned a corner. The Sudanese government was no longer backed by the Muslim Brotherhood, but now it's plunging back into civil war. So we're watching all those steps forward getting erased. These look like steps backward. There are Islamists there. The Iranians are there. It seems like everybody has a role to play in this war. And I'd like to see this thing end. I'd like to see the place become more stable. It's still a part of the Middle East at the end of the day, right? They're part of the Arab League, or at least they were when it was a unified country. So I certainly would like to see things stabilize. I got one quick question for you, and it may not be the easiest thing to answer quickly, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time here this morning. I know you watch things around the Horn of Africa. This is not exactly what we track here at FDD, but it is so close to all the action. This is literally on the other side of the Red Sea, across from Yemen. What should we be watching right now in the Horn?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Two quick things. Obviously, the Nile dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia, and the things that festered out of it. And one of the things that has festered out of it is this renewal of disputes between Somalia and Somaliland. Obviously, Somalia is a nation recognized by the US. Somaliland is a sovereign territory that is not recognized by any nation. And the dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia has kind of reopened that wound in the last couple of months. The important thing here is these countries are bordering on the Gulf of Aden, right across from Yemen. And this is a strategic prime ground for all kinds of bad actors to want ports, to want access to that Gulf of Aden so that they have access to the rest of the Middle East so they can stop or let traffic flow. And those are really important things that we're watching here at FDD.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not only bad actors that want to possibly establish a beachhead there. There are some other actors that are eyeing the Horn of Africa as a place where they may be able to operate a little closer to Yemen, right? We'll keep an eye on that. Anyway, we're going to leave it there. Thank you, Mariam Wahba, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief. Incredibly informative.
Thanks, John.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleagues Mark Montgomery and Brad Bowman have a new piece in Real Clear Defense on President Trump's proposed Golden Dome missile defense system. It's not Iron Dome, folks. It's golden. My colleagues argue that for the project to succeed, it will need more than ample funding and requires strong leadership at the Pentagon with deep expertise in air and missile defense, along with innovative approaches to keeping costs down for U.S. taxpayers. Let's see how this plays out. This will not be cheap. The numbers I saw this morning, $175 billion. That's a B, billion. Wow. Okay. Don't miss my colleagues, Natalie Econo and Ivana Stradner's piece in the New York Sun. It's about Qatar's intensifying ties with Russia, even as Doha courts closer cooperation with the United States. Looks like the Kremlin isn't as diplomatically isolated as Western leaders might say they are. And a good reminder to U.S. leaders, Qatar is more frenemy than friend. And if you don't believe that, I have a 747 to sell you. Finally, FDD's Max Meislish and David May have a new piece on our website highlighting 5 ways South Africa undermines U.S. interests, from its growing ties with Russia, China, and Iran to its smear campaign against Israel at the ICJ and its connections to terrorist groups. Pretoria has a long way to go if it hopes to be seen as a credible actor on the global stage. Stick another fork in it, folks, because we're done for today. If you want a bigger brain, check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org, or take a scroll through our X, Instagram, and YouTube content. And please do support our work with a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Friday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. I'll be joined by Brandy Shufutinsky. She's the director of FDD's brand new program on education and national security. Together, we're going to examine how foreign funding funneled into American schools by maligned actors is poisoning young minds. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.